Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are located today, and welcome to APQC's July Knowledge Management webinar. I'm very excited today. We are going to be talking about the KM Maturity Assessment and how to help mature your existing KM program, or if you're new to KM, even a way to get started. Today we have 4 people actually that are going to take you on a tour guide of this process, starting with myself. I'm Lynda Braksiek. If I haven't met you before, I am the Principal Research Lead for Knowledge Management here at APQC. I am also joined by Darcy Lemons, who is one of our senior advisors and a subject matter expert in knowledge management. And we have 2 guest speakers today as well, joining us from member companies. We have Lisa Weber from Mercer. And Mercer is a 5-year excellence recipient of the KM Maturity Assessment. You'll find out more what that means as we go through this webinar. And she's going to share with us a little bit about her experience using the assessment and how it's helped to advance their program. We also have Maggie Starkey here from the Creighton Corporation, and she is going to share with us the journey that they have begun in knowledge management as well. So excited to have lots of folks to talk to you today. And as usual, throughout our webinar, please use the chat feature or the Q&A feature to put any questions, or if you have comments. We love to have interaction within these webinars. They are recorded so that folks who couldn't join us today can go back to the resource library and refer to them. So just to let you know, again, what we're doing today, we're going to touch on a couple of research highlights, which is really why we're here today to talk about maturity. Then we're going to hear about what a maturity assessment process and tool might look like and how you can leverage that. Then we'll hear from our guest speakers to show you a little bit of best practice approaches that might work for you and your companies going forward. And as usual, we'll close out with some key resources and upcoming opportunities. And we have a very new, exciting opportunity to share with you at the end of the webinar today, too. So stay tuned for that. So getting started with really why we're here talking about maturity today. If you weren't aware already, APQC does a study each year on the trends and the priorities and predictions in the knowledge management field. And when we released this information earlier this year, one of the top 3 priorities for KM teams was focusing on increasing the maturity of their KM programs. And that percentage jumped quite a bit from the end of 2021 to early 2023. So we're trying to do our best to make sure that we're providing information, research, and best practices from other companies on how to achieve some of these priorities within your organization. So today we're talking about maturity, but stay tuned throughout the rest of the year with other resources that we have available where we will be touching on some of these other topics as well. So as usual, we're going to start with a poll. We like to talk to all of you that are on the call today, and we want to hear a little bit about how familiar you might be already with our assessment or not at all. So take a look at the poll and let us know if you've heard of the maturity assessment, also known as the KM CAT. And if you've done it before, maybe you're familiar, but you haven't done it, you're kind of heard about it, or you've never heard about it. It helps to kind of level set where we're going today and make sure we can answer all the questions for you all. We'll give you just a couple of minutes. And if you want to go ahead and answer the question right within the poll that's on your screen, that would be great. And we can compile these results here in just a few seconds. The poll is empty. I'm seeing the poll. Is anybody else seeing an empty poll?
I see the poll, Lynda. Aha.
Oh, it must have worked for most. I apologize if you didn't get it, but so it looks like we have interesting, Darcy. So we have quite a few folks on the call who aren't familiar with this at all, or they're only somewhat familiar. And then we have some that have actually done it a few times, and some that maybe haven't conducted it, but are just familiar. So we have a lot to talk about today then, Darcy.
Right.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights. This helps us to stay focused on the right things for today. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Darcy Lemons, and she's going to give you a little bit of an overview about the maturity assessment, and you will learn more, and please feel free to ask those questions in the chat.
Thank you, Lynda, and welcome everybody. So glad that you all took the time out to join us today and be a part of the conversation. We look forward to sharing with you and hearing your experiences about whether it's with our KM capability assessment and maturity model or another one that you may have used. You know, I encourage you to share your experiences as well as your questions and comments in the chat or using the Q&A feature of Zoom. All right, so I want to start off by saying here, you all have a decision to make. Especially for those of you who are at the beginning of your knowledge management journey in your organizations. And that decision is, what's the right level of maturity for my organization? In our experience of more than a decade, in fact, we're going to be creeping up on 2 decades in the not too distant future of the KM capabilities, of the levels of knowledge management maturity in the KM capability model. Our experience has shown us that you know, not every organization needs to be or even should be a level 4 or level 5. I can hear you gasping from here. And so let me talk a little bit about the levels of maturity and the tool, and I think you'll come to understand why I say that, okay? We at APQC, we're in love with level 3 maturity. We believe it is a significant milestone, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But we believe that getting to level 3 maturity with regard to your KM capabilities in your organizations there's so much value and impact to be realized when you get to level 3, and in part it feels better. And let me explain a little bit about what I mean by that. It feels better because what we've observed is those organizations at level 1, level 2 maturity, or somewhere in between, you know what, their knowledge sharing approaches, their KM activities, their capabilities, their methodologies, et cetera, they tend to be localized, and a lot of times they're very ad hoc. So things can be a little bumpy with regard to their ability to identify critical knowledge, capture or document that knowledge, share it, and enable people to use it in order to help them solve a problem, make a decision, so on and so forth, right? But once you get to level 3 maturity, it feels so much better, because at that point, what we see is, as a hallmark of level 3, is that you've standardized. You have common approaches and processes to enable knowledge to flow through your organization, to enable people to collaborate, to find and access that critical knowledge, to create new critical knowledge, to enable that knowledge to be reviewed by the appropriate SMEs whenever need be, to ensure that it's accurate and up to date. All those wonderful things start coming to fruition at level 3. You have common approaches and processes, which means in essence that you're efficient and you're effective. It doesn't mean that you can slow down or pause or anything like that, but it does mean that things start going a little bit more smoothly. Some of those bumps that you might have experienced at levels 1 and 2 start to smooth out with your standardized and repeatable approaches and processes. And so what we've really heard from a lot of organizations in the 10, 12, I think it's like 13 years now of having the levels of maturity and the capability assessment tool is that the hardest hurdle is really moving from that level 1, level 2 up to level 3. It is a big jump. All right, and to get from those localized ad hoc knowledge management activities and processes in our organizations up to ones that are more systematic, that are consistent, that are repeatable, that we can lift and leverage across different areas of the organization for the benefit of the employees and stakeholders in those parts of the organization. So let me take you on a little journey here, and I want to talk about a little bit more about those levels of maturity and share with you some of the hallmarks of those levels. Whoopsies. Okay, I went a little too fast on the arrow key there. So the levels of maturity. What I've done here is we broke down the 5 levels and provided you with a couple of what we consider to be hallmarks. These are behaviors or activities that are consistent and or typical of what we see in organizations at those levels of maturity. And as I mentioned before, level 3 is a really important milestone, right? At that point in your organization's journey with knowledge management, again, you've got that consistency, there's standardization, repeatable processes and approaches, and you start to really see how or where knowledge sharing and collaboration integrate into the way your organization does business, right? It gets closer and closer to the point of business so that it's integrated into people's workflows and processes. It becomes part of their methodologies and just becomes more of a more natural thing for them to do. The other significant level or milestone here is the level 5 maturity, right? And what we see here is that organizations that achieve level 5 maturity have fully embedded knowledge management into their processes and operations across their organization or the piece of the organization that KM supports. Instead of seeing something as KM as something that is separate and in addition to or on top of their core responsibilities, employees now recognize and accept that knowledge sharing and collaboration are part of their core responsibilities. It's part of the way they work. It's part of the way their team members work. It becomes, in essence, kind of the very fabric of the organization. And once it's fully integrated into the flow of work, what we see is that KM activities are better able to support innovation and drive significant competitive advantage for these organizations. And in fact, if I could add another hallmark at level 5, that would probably be that what we typically see is those organizations at that level of maturity, their collaboration strategies actually often encompass their entire supply chain, including their suppliers and customers. All right. So that's a little bit about APQC's 5 levels of knowledge management maturity and some of the hallmarks and milestones therein. I'd like to talk to you now and just say, so how do you determine where your organization, the KM program or activities in your organization, where do they fall? How do you determine where they are on these levels of maturity? So, okay, one more time with the clicks. There we go. All right. Okay, so APQC developed our KM capability assessment tool in conjunction with our 5 levels of knowledge management maturity several years ago. We did this actually in collaboration with several APQC member organizations. There's a whole history about it in our resource library if you want to read and learn more about the history of that. But what we did was we really had some really serious conversations about the levels of maturity, those hallmarks, those characteristics of behaviors and activities that help define each level of maturity. And then we started saying, well, how would we know? What would help us recognize, assess and recognize those levels of maturity? And we developed the KM capability assessment tool, which is organized into 4 macro categories that you can see here on the screen. Those 4 macro categories encompass 12 different KM capabilities. Together, the levels of knowledge management maturity and the KM capability assessment tool provide a really solid foundation to build a strong KM program in your organizations. So next question, when should you take the assessment? Okay, my computer is not wanting, here we go. Hang on, y'all. Okay, so that's a good question, Darcy. Here we go. And we get this question a lot. When is it appropriate to take the assessment? And honestly, I would tell you every single time I would say right from the beginning. Okay. Start at the beginning. People often protest and they say, no, we don't have anything. I'm like, well, you might be surprised at what you do have in your organization. It might not be a formal effort at that point in time, but there are often some structured knowledge sharing processes and activities going on in the organization. They may not be called knowledge sharing. They may not be called knowledge management in the lexicon of your organization. But if the purpose of them is to enable collaboration and enable the sharing of knowledge, then they should be counted in as part of those knowledge sharing activities in your organization. And so, I really think the best time to start is right from the beginning. When you do that, what the assessment does, and the results of the assessment, they provide you a baseline, a snapshot in time of what your capabilities, those 12 CAM capabilities, look like at that point in time, as of July 26, 2023, right? And then then with that baseline and the results of the assessment, you can make some really informed decisions for your KM strategy in your organization in terms of where do we need to focus our efforts. The data can help you make some decisions about the resources you might need. It can inform if you have to develop a business case, which is coincidentally one of the 12 KM capabilities. It can help inform that business case. And then throughout your journey, we encourage you to take the assessment periodically throughout your knowledge management journey. What it'll do is it's going to help you identify where do we have successes and really good capabilities, strong capabilities that we can continue to build on, and successes that we can celebrate. And it'll also help you identify where might there be some weak areas or some gaps in our capabilities that we might need to prioritize and focus some effort and resources on in order to strengthen those weak areas and bring them up to the desired level of maturity. As you can see here, it can help you demonstrate and document your progress in your KM journey over that period of time, those years, as well as identify where there might be emerging gaps or some areas where we've kind of stagnated a little bit. And perhaps need to re-energize and rejuvenate our KM efforts in that particular area. So why should you assess then? There's a wide variety of reasons as to why you should assess. And you can see several of those listed here, but I'm going to talk to a couple of those and add a few in. One of the reasons is for that ability to gather data and collect feedback, right? Going through the assessment helps you clarify how your team members and other key stakeholders in the organization view the knowledge management activities and program and its performance within the organization. It can help validate your knowledge management strategy if you already have one, or inform a new strategy if you're just building one. It can help you understand where you're achieving the goals, right? Where there are some opportunities for improvement, and what do we have foundationally that we can continue to build on. Again, going for that snapshot. Taking the assessment also can provide you. It can be used then to provide and develop a roadmap or a path to those higher levels of maturity, so that your organization can design, implement, and ultimately benefit from having those consistent, standard, repeatable knowledge sharing processes and approaches in your organizations. And finally, it can help you communicate what's going on, the progress that's being made, and help you identify where there are opportunities to celebrate successes. Staying on that vein of why you should do this, we think it's really important to assess and look at the impact of knowledge management in your organizations. And for those of you who've been following APQC and our thought leadership in knowledge management over the years, you know we're all about the measurement. That is a key recurring theme for us here at APQC. And we so believe in the power of measurement and how it can help guide our efforts in knowledge management in our organizations. And so regularly assessing your KM maturity and your KM capabilities is really, it's significantly more likely to help you achieve the goals that you set out for your KM program. Assessment forces us, that's a strong word, but I think that's the right word here. It forces us to scrutinize our KM program and recalibrate it if necessary. It helps ensure that we're staying aligned with what's important to the business, that we are focused on today's business needs and looking towards the future for what our business, our organization might need from knowledge management 6 months from now, a year from now, 18 months, or whatever your time horizon is. It also helps us identify and address barriers to knowledge sharing. So you may find through your assessment results that maybe you're weak in a particular capability area. Maybe you don't have clear objectives, or you're not communicating well, or perhaps your weakness is in the technology area. And fixing that can go a long way towards overcoming hurdles that hinder participation in our KM approaches and processes and activities. And the assessment also gives you some objective data to support why you need to expand or enhance what you're doing. So the organizations that assess, what we've seen, the data has shown us, is that organizations that assess regularly are more likely to get the support they need from leadership in order to expand and enhance knowledge management in their organizations in line with growing demand from those organizations and from their stakeholders in those organizations.
Hey, Darcy,
Yes, ma'am.
We have a couple of questions that are related to timing. And so you've spoken about regularly assessing. Can you give a little insight? We've had a couple of questions around how often does it make sense to do it? So at what stage or milestone might we do a reassessment? And then we have another question in the Q&A that I think you can help us with as well. So maybe talk about the timing of it a little bit. And
yes, absolutely. So from a timing perspective, well, like I said, I recommend you start at the beginning, right? From the moment you start taking knowledge management seriously in your organization. And then from that point forward, I recommend that you do it at least, or I would say annually, and probably every year to 18 months. We do have some organizations, and one of them here on the webinar with us today, Lisa Weber at Mercer, who they do take it annually. It helps to serve, they use that, well, I'm gonna let her talk about how they use it and why they do it the way they do. But I would say, you need to take it probably annually to every 18 months so that you have that data coming in to help inform your plans for knowledge management and be able to respond to requests from leadership and managers and so forth as to the strength of KM and how it's helping the organization.
Good deal. And I think we're going to hear a little bit more from our members here in a second, and they'll probably speak to the timing component as well. So
right.
I'm going to touch on another question that was in the Q&A that I thought was really good, and then maybe we can move into our member conversations after that.
Absolutely.
But there was a question that said, is there a standard or common amount of time to get from a level 1 to a 3, maybe based on size of the organization? And Cindy took a stab at answering this for us in the Q&A, and I just want to make sure everybody kind of hears the answer, because I think it's a really good conversation to have. But basically, there is no set timeline, right? Which is the right answer. But we have had organizations get to a level 3 as short as 2 years, and others that have taken 10 to 15. It doesn't mean that you don't have success along the way, But if you get there quickly, you have to make sure that you have strong change and measurement capabilities to help it continue to sustain. And one of those things is to continue to do the assessment, right? Along the way. So, but anyway, overall, she said on average, she believes it's about a 2 to 3 year journey to get to that level 3 if you're very intentional and you're focused on your program. So anything else you want to add, Darcy, to that?
I would say intentionality, focus and intentionality. Those are key because you can't lose sight. You just cannot lose sight of the ball with regard to knowledge management. The moment we lose focus in terms of our connection and communication with leadership, or our connection and communication with our end users, then we'll start to take steps backwards.
Sure.
And we don't want to do that. So intentionality and a laser focus are really necessary in order to make that progress and achieve level 3 maturity.
Okay, cool.
But why don't we let Lisa and then Maggie tell the stories about how intentionality and focus helped them?
Yeah, and so I am so happy to have Lisa Weber here again, knowledge management leader from Mercer. And Mercer is an HR professional services organization. And again, like I mentioned, they have sustained at least a level 3 of maturity and above for the last 5 years. So they have some great best practices to share. So go ahead, Lisa.
Sure. Thank you, Lynda and Darcy, for having me on, representing my team. So a little bit about Mercer. Like Lynda said, we're an HR consulting firm. We're in the professional services space. We're owned by Marsh McLennan. So there's 25,000 employees in our organization, about 80,000 across our whole parent company structure. So why APQC? We've been members for a long time, probably over 10 years. And in 2017, we restructured to become a centralized knowledge management team in the firm. So we had a lot of great things happening in pockets all over the company, but it was fragmented. So in 2017, our executive sponsor asked me to pull it together, centralize, which in and of itself was a milestone that the company was ready to think in that way. So we did 1 year pulling these different groups together, forming a team, forming, storming, norming, all that good stuff. And so in 2018, I said, you guys, well, we get this assessment part of our membership. We're already paying for it. It comes free with the membership. Why don't we just submit and see how we're stacking up? The recognition is wonderful, but that's not why we did it. We really needed data and information. Being in HR, we have a lot of actuaries in our company, so we live and breathe data. I need numbers, I need metrics, I need quantification, and I need it from an external source that's going to validate and challenge and probe our thinking and how we're leading our KM program. So having that validation process working with Darcy has been immensely helpful. So our journey has really been since 2018. I do it annually. I submit at the end of the year. I happen to do it every November, December timing, just kind of like a year-end wrap-up, look back. How we do it, APQC, Darcy, I think you guys changed the questions maybe 3-4 years ago. So we're in a set questionnaire now. I literally have the same Word doc file, and we do a save as every year and add another column, and I take a shot at it first, and I go through all 12 dimensions, answering the questions, rating ourselves. I don't look at the prior years though. I blind that, I keep that hidden, cover that up. And so I am now assessing true to the spirit of the year that has just completed. When I'm done with my assessment, my leadership team, so there's 4 other members on our KM leadership team, they go in and do the assessment and challenge me. Oh, Lisa, I think you're overrating, or wait a second, we did more in that space. You've underrated us. And then we leave comments. So I wrap that all up, and I send it over to Darcy. And so, depending on Darcy's workload, she turns it around pretty quick. So we have something by the end of the year. Sometimes it spills over into January. And I will say it's been a boost to the team. We have a very stable team. We're at that point where we haven't had a ton of turnover. So it's a lot of core teammates year over year who feel like a pat on the back. We've made progress. I will also say it's not a bad thing if you slide backwards. And so I wouldn't do it for the score that you get at the end. Do it for the essence of what the questions are challenging to you to do on your KM strategy. And I do it to close the gaps. So I know we're strong in certain areas, very strong on the people side and the case study and the governance and the budget. That's all nailed. I've got that. The change management, communication, some of those other categories we're weak on. So the cool part is if you do it frequently enough, and if you have a few things you focus on year after year, you can hone in and see if you made progress. So about 3 years ago, KM metrics was our thing. We had to get on top of it. I needed more data, more stories. How is our content being used? How are communities being used as collaboration tools? We invested in that category, that bucket. And sure enough, the year after, we jumped up 2 points. So you can start to see what you put into it, you get out of it. You may slide backwards. So if you're going through a time of change, disruption, a reorg, a change, acquisition, divestiture, whatever the business situation is, you may roll backwards, and that's okay. It just shows you where you put your time is where you get your results. So that's the history. How I use the output, like I said, my leadership loves data. They don't need the devil in the detail. They need the snapshot picture. So one of the visuals that Darcy sends back is the scorecard that shows you the 12 dimensions and how you stack up. So I can compare against all the other firms who have, or organizations who have submitted. So that's one benchmark. And then I can get the professional services cut and track how we stack up. For our stakeholders in the business who we partner with day in, day out on KM, they will hear us refer to APQC. So they kind of know the acronym, they know we're a member. They're very familiar with the 5-level chart that Darcy showed. So I call it the ladder chart. Our stakeholders know when I say APQC, the ladder chart, they know exactly what I mean. So I wish we had done it prior to this big restructure in 2017, 2018, because I would have loved to have seen when we were a level 1, 2, where we came out. First year we did it, we were at a level 3. Standardization is the fun zone. That is where you get to see progress. Not to say optimization and innovation isn't fun, but that standardization, you start to see rubber hits the road and you're building into part of your culture. So that's been fun. Where I plan to go from here, continually submit every year, comes with our membership. Why not? Doesn't take that long to submit, and it's great data that comes back. We are partnering in Mercer more and more with our sister companies. So I've turned the sister companies on to APQC with the memberships about. We might morph into that broader membership where all of us are under one umbrella. But we need to standardize across the sister companies. So I plan to use those 12 dimensions in the report as a way to have conversations around how do you do things? How do we do things? Is there a best practice? Should we merge things together? Does someone have a better way of doing something we should consider? I will say that is the long-term vision. Short-term, from now till November, December, when I submit this year, we are doing a very hard push on change management communication. We've just survived, and I literally mean that in the nicest of ways. We just survived a huge technology implementation for SharePoint Online. So we've not been able to progress on a lot of the innovation because we've been managing this migration and this transformation, getting from A to B. Now we can run again faster, and the communication change management we need to accelerate on. So that's going to be interesting to see if we're able to move the needle before I submit later in the year. So I think that covers our story. Are there any questions I should take now?
There are not any questions in the chat per se, but I was taking some notes of some of your best practices and kind of made a list, and I'm going to pop it in the chat. What I kind of took from you, and then see if anybody else has anything to add, and that way it's captured and others can leverage that and learn from that as we go forward. But such great information. And for myself, as a prior member of APQC before I worked here and having done the assessment, I was like, oh, I should have done that the way Lisa did it, at my past company. So every time you hear something from someone else, I just think it opens up your eyes and gives you new ideas. So amazing.
Right. And I just want to say, Lisa, I really appreciate you mentioning that, your capabilities may ebb and flow, and it's okay. The assessment is a way to help track that, and then leverage the results to say, oh, we did kind of slide backwards there, and then you can make an informed decision as to whether to focus effort on, reinforcing that capability and strengthening it? Or is there something else going on in the organization that has caused us to shift our focus a little bit? And it's okay. We're not going to go all the way back to like ground zero with that capability, but we need to wait another year before we actually put any effort towards that. So you have some data to help you make those decisions.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. And we have a few questions popping in the chat right now. There's a couple in there I would love for Darcy to take a stab at just typing them in the chat so everybody can see them, if you don't mind. But there is one that says somebody is currently working on their assessment and wanted to know, Lisa, do you guys provide notes for every single question?
No. That's more when we're collaborating as a leadership team to say, remember we did that, or remember we did like a user survey or a colleague survey. Remember we heard that. So like we reference it amongst, when we send to Darcy, it's just a clean submission through the tool. Yeah.
And that's probably just a personal choice too on how you want to do it. And that's the way Mercer does it. Others might want to capture every single thing in there because they want to make sure I think you just get to decide, right? What works best.
What works for you and who's responding, how big of a group you need to cast the net out to, or just keep it to yourself if you're the one in charge.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So I'm gonna keep us moving in the interest of time. I want to make sure that Maggie gets a chance to tell her story, and we'll keep watching the questions in the chat. So I'm gonna move to Maggie Starkey, who I just met for the first time just a few weeks ago as well. And Maggie comes from the Kraton organization or corporation, and they develop, manufacture, and market specialty polymer and bio-based chemicals. So very fascinating company. And I just have to say one thing, when we met Maggie a couple weeks ago, and she talked about when she joined the company and joined the KM team, she said she found her home. And those of us that work in the field of KM, we all know what that feels like when we found that home working in knowledge management. It kind of fits what we love and how we like to work. So anyway, welcome Maggie, and you go right ahead and share with us. Do you want me to move to your first slide, or do you want to do a little intro first?
Yeah, you can go to the first slide. That's
okay.
Fine.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you, Lynda. So just a quick tidbit, you guys have probably never heard of Kraton before, but if you've heard of the purple mattress, our polymer is in the gel that makes the purple mattress so comfortable and successful. So that's just one way that you might recognize our company. But different from Lisa with Mercer, so in our organization, we're a functional KM program. So we only have KM right now in our R&D or our research and development group. So even though our company has a little less than 2,000 employees, we're really only focusing on about 200, give or take, employees within the R&D organization. So just a little different. Hopefully we'll expand in the future company-wide, but for right now, this is just kind of the scale. So the reason I bring that up is because even if you are a functional group, or it's just a team, or just a business unit, it's still valid to take this KM assessment, because you can always improve, and it could potentially give justification to broaden this throughout the rest of your organization. So much like Lisa mentioned, at the very beginning of our program, so our program's only two years old. So in 2021, when we first started doing KM towards the end of the year, I was like, why not? Let's just do it. I had very low expectations, to be 100% transparent. I knew it was not going to be good because we didn't start at the beginning of the year. So we probably only had about 6 months of real official KM activities going on at that point in time. So it was just myself as the KM person. I'm still the only person in the R&D organization that is dedicated to KM. But really, we just wanted to see where we were so we could continue to grow and improve from there. So I just wanted to show you guys, this is the scorecard, one of the first things that will come back as part of your data that you get from Darcy from your results. So this is a comparison slide that I actually showed our steering team and our executive sponsors last year. And I do this every year, but I just wanted to compare the two so they can see how much we've improved from year to year. So we took the data from 2021, we worked really hard with our strategy, what we were going to do, our critical success factors, and the areas where we needed to improve upon. And then you can see from 2022, a lot of that hard work and lots of overtime, a little bit of sanity lost probably too, but definitely you can see that there is some improvement in a lot of the areas. So in 2021, our overall assessment level was actually a 0. And then in 2022, our overall score was a level 2. So we actually jumped to 2 levels from that year. So the main point of this really is, you know, we saw there was a lot of things that we were doing decent on, but there was also a lot of areas for improvement. So then from 2022, after I got these results, I did the same thing. So I saw, okay, you know, budget, change management, content management, et cetera. Those are still some areas where we can do better on. And so then from there, that's where we shifted our focus to really try to master and get better in those areas. There's also sometimes, for example, with budget. So we may never go past the level 1, just because I know there's a couple questions around having a dedicated KM budget. We can't have that because I'm the only employee dedicated to KM. So we can't have our own cost center with just 1 employee. We have to have at least 2 employees. So it's also okay if you're lower in some areas, just because you can't get the resources or you don't have the resources. In my case, unless they hire another KM dedicated individual, we'll never have our own budget. So we just have a separate budget within our overall larger the team that I report to. So it's really just important to focus and use this. We did look somewhat, like you can see the line graph with your organization compared to the all participants. So we did look at that just to see where we compared. The steering team was a little bit more interested in that from a business perspective than what I necessarily might have been. But really my main drive and focus was getting better year after year within our KM program. What can we do? Yes, it's cool to say, oh, well, we're a lot further ahead than the rest of the participants in this area, but we really are not that great in this area compared to others. So it's nice to kind of have that look too, but really the main focus is, for us anyway, is continuously improving within our KM program. So I do this on my own, essentially. I do have at times, like our IT person that we work with for KM stuff, I will have him review some of the IT portions, some of the other stuff. But for the most part, I do take this on my own. But I also, part of it is a little bit, I'm OCD, but I do type in, if I have a justification for why I'm scoring this, I actually put in the comments of the assessment of what those items are that we do to say, yes, you know, this is how we achieve that level. And that just helps me to say, are we really at that level of what I'm saying that we are? So it's kind of like a check. And then I know that that data is available for Darcy and the others at APQC to look at as well. So we do this every year. Obviously, we only have 2 years under our belt, but I plan to take this again towards the end of this year. Usually I take it towards the end of Q3, the middle to the end, just so we usually have the results back in time to review it either at our last steering team meeting of the year or the very first one at the beginning of the year, so we can kind of see the results to see what our focus will be in these areas for the next year. So really, if you want to go to the next slide, Lynda, this is just kind of a summary of just some of the stuff that I've talked about also, but really, in my opinion, the assessment allows you to show the value of not just the KM program, but knowledge sharing in general to your stakeholders. So when I showed this to the steering team, and actually last year I showed it to our extended leadership team as well within R&D, they were like, oh, wow, like it was kind of an eye-opener to them of, you know, there's a lot of work that's being done. There's a lot of areas. This is not just something that you're winging and telling us whatever, you know, you think is best, when there's actually some data and structure behind it. Being in R&D, we are a data-driven company and data-driven culture. So, you know, that data is important to them. So it really helps you to show value. It, like I mentioned, it allows you to discover areas that you need to improve in. But it's also, because of this, you could say, we're never going to reach a higher level of maturity if we don't get this certain technology implemented or something like that. So you could also utilize this for resources, for additional resources, or if I had another half of a person or 2 people, whatever it might be, helping me, we could grow and be more standardized and not have to kind of just be strung along within the process. So you can kind of use it as leverage as well, not just celebrating and showing the value of all the hard work and the effort. And the last point, being realistic about your expectations. So my expectations, like I said, were super low for the very first one. A level 0, I didn't know there was a level 0, but it made sense that that's what we had just because we were starting out, right? But so when you take it for the first time, don't think that you're going to get to a level 3 or, even a level 2. You might, and that's really great, but you want to set goals once you have that benchmarking of, okay, I've achieved a level 1. So next year I want to try to do this, this, and this to see if I can choose a level 2, because within the questions, you don't know which ones are categorized to which level, but it gives you ideas of what you can do to implement to improve your processes. So if you really take the time to look at those answers of what you're not doing and keep track of those, then you can base those to have your goals set. Your company, like for us, for example, a level 3 would be awesome to get, but I don't know if we will go beyond that just because I don't see our leadership team putting much more resources or budget into it unless we go company wide. So just be realistic, but also, set yourself up for success to go where you need to be and have your goals. That's pretty much it.
Awesome. You had a comment in the chat that said somebody thought it was very helpful because they're also in R&D. So thank you, Maggie. So your best practices are already helping someone else. Oh, and somebody else was just commenting on when they were looking at the score on the screen and saw that the change management component was low. They said that was an eye opener for them as well, that they need to focus on that area. So great stuff. Yeah. Thank you so much. Anything else you want to add, Maggie or Darcy? Did you want to add anything? Because I know you helped Maggie with the assessment process.
Absolutely. Maggie, thank you for sharing your story. And I just want to say that, so Lynda she captured some notes from your story and posted it in the chat. And one of the things, you just mentioned it too, certain categories you may never get to a higher level, right? You have to make some informed decisions. You have to be realistic. And I love the fact that you were so open about that, because I think that is something that a lot of our KM teams, practitioners and teams struggle with in their own organizations. And it's been a joy to work with both Maggie and Lisa to just over the years and see the growth. And yes, as Lisa mentioned, sometimes you might go step backwards a little bit in a couple of the capability areas, but overall it's been a great growth journey for both, and it's been so much fun working with both of them on their assessments.
Awesome. All right, we are going to do another poll, final poll. So after you've heard everything that we just talked about and heard from our members who have done this, we'd just like to get some insights. How likely would you be to conduct a KM assessment within your organization? Maybe just let us know what you're thinking about after you just heard what you heard. Go ahead and take a moment and we'll wait a few seconds here. And any answer is okay. But we will definitely provide you with some resources if you want to find out more. And I'm looking, we have a couple more questions here in the chat too that we'll hit on here in just a second. So maybe Talene, let's go ahead and close the poll. Thank you. So we have those few that have done it before that will continue. And then we have a good percentage that said very likely within the next 6 to 12 months. So get ready, Darcy. It's going to get busy. And also those that want to find out a little bit more information, perfectly understandable. And we're going to provide you with some of those resources in just a couple minutes where you can find out more. And not likely, that's okay too. I know sometimes it's not the right thing for everybody. So thank you for being honest with that. Hopefully it was still valuable information. And if you ever need any more information about it, you can always come and see us. But I'm going to jump into questions. We have a couple in the chat. Let's see. Looking for a question here. Is the KM lead in the Is the KM lead in the organization the only one that should fill out the assessment, or does anyone do this as a group or have others review it in the company as a check? And maybe Darcy, I mean, I have my own experiences with this, but I'll let you answer because you work with all of our members and you probably have various answers to this.
Sure. So typically it's someone from the KM team who completes and submits the assessment. So sometimes that's the KM, the lead for that team, assuming there is a team. Sometimes you're a team of one. Sometimes it might be someone who's on the team. It doesn't really matter to me who submits it, as long as there's communication going on, right? If it's someone on the KM team, hopefully they've let their KM leader know that they're submitting the assessment and sought input from the other members of the team, and hopefully even from other stakeholders, end users who are, out there participating in the communities or receiving the benefit of some of those knowledge sharing activities and are willing to provide some feedback.
Yeah, great. And just as an aside, I think both Maggie and Lisa might have touched on this. I know Maggie said she's a team of one, so of course she has a lot of that responsibility right now. I know Lisa does it in a little bit more collaborative effort, right? And includes some of her stakeholders. And I know in my experience in the past as well, we did it in iterations, right? I took a stab at it as a lead, then I'd include my KM team and review that. Then we'd go out to our stakeholders, right? So you can do it in different ways. And I think you just have to do what works best for you and what message is going to be taken forward best with your leaders and your business as well. Okay.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
Another great question. And then I think we'll jump into wrapping us up with some of our resources. How do we continually make the maturity assessment model relevant to current disruptions and changes? And it's asking specifically, are the questions the same from before the pandemic and post-pandemic? And looking at organizations focused now that are more on like agility and resilience and learning and all of that kind of stuff. So maybe a little bit on that, Darcy, if you want to.
Absolutely. So let me parse that out just a bit. So in terms of our assessment, yes, the questions are the same. We actually, at the very beginning of the pandemic, is when we took the opportunity to revamp our KM capability assessment tool. It is now in a question and answer format, and prior to that, it was more like an essay test. But it's the same capabilities, right? We just took the statements from the original, turned them into questions with associated answer sets. And I think the key in terms of making sure that it's relevant is really understanding, how do you make KM relevant to your organization? Understanding in your company, your organization, your firm, what's important to your organization, right? What's going on inside your organization, or what is impacting it from, what external factors might be impacting it, and understanding how KM can contribute to a larger solution, like if you're going through a digital transformation, for example, or maybe you're going through some type of process and performance excellence transformation. Where does KM come to play in that, and how can knowledge management support the organization in times of crisis? Again, connecting people to people, as Lisa mentioned earlier, being able to connect people to other people who can help them solve problems or brainstorm or innovate or what have you, connecting people to the right knowledge in order for them to take that knowledge and complete a task, make a decision, and things like that. So it's really about understanding, in my mind, it's about understanding what is important to the organization, and KM being able to respond to that or be proactive in taking a role in that, and mirroring what the organization needs.
Great. And we have a couple more questions in the Q&A, but we'll do those as a follow-on. And if everyone is not aware, we actually will send out a recording, and we also make a write-up of this webinar, more of a transcript with some of the answers to the questions and the capture of the chat information as well. So that's available for you after the fact too. So if you didn't write everything down, it's okay. Now we're going to jump into just a couple of things. Because this was a little bit of educational component today about the KM assessment, we wanted to make sure that you have access to some resources around the knowledge management assessment. So there's a kind of a laundry list here for you, whether it's about the assessment itself, whether you want some resources to read about the benefits, and some of the folks who have reached those higher levels of maturity and seen what their programs actually look like. So there's these resources available to you. And then we have just a couple of things that we want to give you some reminders on. So I'm going to let Darcy talk for just a minute or two to do a little bit of just a teaser on this program, and then we'll all close it out with our final resources.
Absolutely. So we're so excited to announce the launch of our Certified Knowledge Manager course as part of our Knowledge Excellence Certification program here at APQC. This is hot off the presses. We just rolled it out today. So y'all are some of the first to hear about it. And really, this is, as you can see over there, it is an immersive 3-day in-person course. And it's really for anyone who wants to develop some really strong knowledge manager skills. Whether you are already tasked with the responsibility for knowledge management in your organization, or maybe you've just been tasked with helping your team or your department do a better job of being able to capture some of that critical knowledge and document it in a way that's useful for others so that they can use it in the work that they're doing. You know, from a project up to a formal effort, we provide you, through this course, we'll provide you with some really good skills and tips and tricks for being successful, a successful knowledge manager in your organization. I believe there's information in here on how to register. There's information in here on if you want some more detail, and we certainly are happy to provide all of that to you all, and look forward to seeing you at one of our courses.
Yeah. Awesome. Exciting news to have a certification course out there. And then just one final reminder as well, upcoming webinars. We've decided to start to let you know when the upcoming webinars are, so you can mark your calendars now. We have topics chosen. The titles may change slightly as we move forward and get more information, but the next two are pretty much set. And I'm really excited about August, a back to school edition, because we don't want to ever forget about those KM essentials, because that's how you continue to mature your program. So we're really going to talk about those things that never go out of style from a KM perspective. And we'll build on that with those very mature program at a glance with some of our recipients of our level 3 or above KM excellence mature organizations in September. And then we're going to jump into change management in October, which is, I know, a hot topic for everyone. And we're going to do something new this year in November. We're going to have kind of a mid-year conference touch point. So if you attended the conference or you didn't attend the conference, this is a great way for you to come and find out what kinds of things people are putting in place that they learned at the conference, and maybe find out what things might be upcoming in next year's 2024 conference as well. And then we will round out our year talking about technology, because who isn't talking about technology, especially with AI and ChatGPT right everywhere right now. So we're going to have some exciting things. Be on the lookout for upcoming roundtables if you want to participate in some and have a technology conversation with us. And anything else that you're interested in, please put it in the comments when you fill out your survey, when you close out this webinar today. But we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know what you felt about today's webinar and what things you'd like to see in the future. And with that, I will say thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.